Welcome to the inaugural edition of Gather Project's Deep Dive. Very excited to be doing this new show. The Gather Project is something that we've started over the last year, which is about bringing people together who have a love of cinema. And as we have discussed on past shows before, students from across the country who are interested in film have been very interested in connecting with one another. And we have developed a number of programs related to that, including a newsletter, a show called What's Your Story, which is related to people's careers. But one of the things that people kept talking about was an interest in the craft of various things related in entertainment. And so we've created this show called Deep Dive, which we are starting today. This is the pilot, the inaugural edition. And we are fortunate enough to have the actor Billy Crudup here with us today to discuss acting. And I have to say, all kidding aside, Billy and I have been friends. Full disclosure, we've been friends. I realize next year we'll make it 2/3 of our life that we will have known one another.
Wait,
hard
what?
to believe.
Oh
Yeah.
my.
But we
It was 86, right? 86.
86.
Yeah.
1986 was when we met. And if people can do math, they can figure out how old we are.
Yeah, they can.
An algebra question. But so, all kidding aside related to that, I do think we're lucky to have you, Billy, to talk about acting because to give you a proper introduction, Billy has, after a stint, an undergraduate at University of North Carolina, and discovering
You say stint like I didn't graduate. Just to be clear, I did graduate.
He did graduate. Okay. He did graduate.
A little bit late, but I still graduated.
And then realized that acting was something that he was wanting to pursue while he was in college, and enrolled and graduated from NYU's graduate program of acting. And over the years, I've been blessed enough to watch Billy develop and grow as an actor, and now to be, someone who's quite accomplished, award winning, 4-time Tony nominee and Tony winner.
Hey,
Because of Utopia, and recently won the Emmy for The Morning Show.
Oh yeah.
So really, thank you for doing this.
Hey, Casey, I'm thrilled to be here, and you're not going to find any shortage of actors who are excited to talk about themselves and acting. So you could have cast a wide net, and anybody would have appeared. Thank God this is hopefully useful for some people.
Well, and like
typically
we
it's
said,
just me talking to my friends.
I think it's like I said, students have been very interested to learn more, and I think I'm excited about the conversation too. We thought to kind of, speaking of students and talking about kind of where it all started, I thought we would give a little glimpse of what where it
You
all
want me to
started.
do a monologue?
No, a little glimpse of where it all started. Esther, do you have something that you could share with us?
Oh, we got a clip. How about this? Oh, General College, you son of a gun. This is some of my best work. Not me, not me, not me, not me. Here it comes. It's Adam Rice, creator. Ooh, warm beer sucks.
Man, I think I got a fridge in here.
Yeah,
Warm beer
I think that was
sucks.
his line.
I know what you mean, Rick.
I can't believe
Get
you
it. By
remember
the way,
this.
I'm about Will's age right
They're
there.
pretty cheap, I think.
How about that?
Wait, really?
I'm 18. Will's 17.
Wow, that's
What you got there?
How about that?
insane.
These, my friends, are pictures of the
that's so
hottest
funny.
I mean, he doesn't have
party
that
right at the
sweet
best
mullet.
damn house on campus. And what party's that? The Tri-Side
Shame
Christmas
turtlenecks
orgy.
went out.
Where you been, dude? I keep forgetting you're a freshman. And I keep forgetting you're a sophomore.
So, I mean, as
Yeah,
you
I
can
should be a
see,
junior
yeah,
there, except for
that
jerk-off
to
English
all the
professor.
students out there, that
Brother,
kid
man.
who is
Oh, wait a second.
who's
These are pictures of your
playing
frat.
the role within his student
There's more
soap
girls than the
opera. He
guys.
has one day
You
become an
better believe it.
accomplished
It's a great way.
theater
I
and
mean,
film actor.
it's got to be clear from that clip that there was really nowhere for me to go. I was already a fully formed performing artist.
Everything that you had, it was there right from the beginning.
I showed my son, who is 17, who I was just talking about, a clip from that. And I was encouraging him to go to college. And that was that was the thesis of my argument. Look at the work that I was doing at that time. I know I haven't improved that much, but I've become slightly more sophisticated in my process because of the extent of my education. And I think that is proof positive. I certainly had the energy and the interest and the capability. The primary capability, I think, when you're starting out as an actor is to sublimate your ego. Most of the people, it's interesting because one might think it's the opposite, because you're appearing in front of an audience and you're taking the stage. So this kind of requires some ego, but invariably you're putting on a costume. You're probably playing a character. There's only so many protagonists in every story. So typically for me, I was playing, the funny guy, or, the class clown, or something that was somewhat emasculating, somewhat humiliating, but I didn't mind that part of it. What I liked was I got to be part of the collective creative storytelling. And that was just a community that I felt comfortable enough in. And it's no mistake that if you go to any theater sort of department in high school or graduate school, a portion of that population will be people who don't feel like they fit in other places. And there is something about that, the disaffected, something about those who feel odd, who feel that the system doesn't work for them in some unquantifiable way.
To other people in some way.
And somehow that's the storytelling. The fundamental part of storytelling is a bond that creates like this little tribe. And one of the things that I thought was challenging for me when I was coming out of undergraduate school was you can get a lot of great undergraduate conservatory training, but if you go to a liberal arts education, even if you take all the performance classes that the entire university offers, you may not still have the kind of focus and capability that you'll get from a conservatory program, because you're also taking liberal arts classes. Right. So I felt, even though I had taken all of those performance classes, and even though my work on general college speaks for itself, I didn't feel that that was a way in which I could seriously participate in making a career out of this. I knew it was a way that I could fit in as I moved into adulthood, which is a really important transition as you separate from your parents and you kind of carve your own way. Right. You've got to find your people. And there's no question that I felt a level of comfort and confidence and belonging in that group of, the carnies, the storytellers. And so that was I think the genesis of my interest in acting. Right. But then the sort of dutiful, responsible Boy Scout version of it of my own psyche came through, where it's like, nobody makes a living at acting. Just look at the stats. It's pretty easy. Right. If you check out the number of people who are in SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, or Actors Equity, and what the median income is and how long people's careers are. It is a terrible business proposition to get into. You have to be prepared for an enormous amount of instability. So the only way to hedge your bets against that instability is by having extensive training, and hopefully one that you can earn a degree with, so that you can pivot if you need to in your career. you have the capacity and the degree to teach at a certain point at a collegiate level, which is a much more stable income. And I think that those were some of the primary forces behind me wanting to go to graduate school. Yeah.
I never knew that. That's interesting. You know, it's funny. I mean, well, a couple of things. One, you know, in approaching the conversation today, I mentioned this before we started, on what you do as an art and what you do, the way you view that art and what you do in facilitating that art, right? And to start, you're kind of starting to answer some of this already, but I wanted to broach it from a general perspective, like the way that you frame what it is that you do. You know, talking with Francesca this morning, I said I was going to start it off. The first question would be the most appropriate way to frame this, which is, Russell, what do you love about music? Or in your case, Billy,
Good.
what do you love about acting?
Good. Well, as you, again, to reference that clip again, what you saw, I think, if I were to look back at it and break down a little bit of it, was not me acting, but me trying to fit in at college. The way that I fit in at college was, again, being a performer, being a class clown. That was an extension of my socialization, not an extension of my interest in artistry. So yeah. There's a major transition you have to make. I remember this, reading this clip by Olympia Dukakis. She said that, you know, the same reasons you enter into acting don't have to be the same reasons you stay in acting and performing. And so many of us enter that space as a way of accommodating a need for a social group. And we're just the one, you know, we're the ones when you're sitting in class and second grade or third grade or something, and the teacher's like, okay, so Thanksgiving is coming up. Who wants to dress up as a turkey this year? You know, we're the guys who are always like, I would totally do that. You know, for whatever reason, that was a way of fitting in, being a class clown, getting attention, getting people to like you, you know, and I moved around a lot. So that was always a big part of my need, was to have lasting friendships. And that's hard to do when you're always meeting new people. So in any case, that's graduate school. I mean, that's undergraduate. And then when I make the decision to go to graduate school, one of the things that is they insist upon is that you learn how to take it seriously. Part of taking it seriously is understanding it, the difficulty of it as a craft, and the ingenuity that you can employ within something that seems so simple. In some ways, like for instance, in that scene, all I did was memorize the lines and try to think of a funny way to do it and come up with some kind of joke in there, and I make some faces. But that's not what we would call text analysis. Text analysis is something you learn when you're in school, which is, I mean, if I could, I'll paraphrase, or I'll give my own spin on what I feel it is now. It's understanding why we've all gathered for this moment. So for instance, when we go to see a play, there's 150 people, you know, off-Broadway theater, have decided to pay $30 each to gather for some reason. So what is the event of that? The playwright might say it's to be inspired by their insight into this particular story. The playwright might say it's to bring a bit of joy and levity to an otherwise dour life. The playwright might say it's a way to thrill an audience, unconsciously expecting something else. You know, there's a million different reasons why we would gather for that event. Yeah. Text analysis is the actor's way of understanding how that is articulated within that particular play, within that particular musical, within that particular piece of performance art. So if the intent of the playwright and the director and the producers is to thrill the audience, text analysis will tell you how to go about with this particular play, how to find the thrills. what choice can you make as an actor each time to help the collective ability of this company to thrill the audience? So you word for word break down what the interest, what the meaning, what the
it's almost like defining your purpose in a sense of
precisely
delivering
so
this role.
I'm not the playwright, right? I'm an interpretive artist. So I have to try to discern what their interest is in telling this story, gathering all of us, creating this event, and see what I can do to help facilitate that experience. And that comes from really understanding your part, understanding what part that plays in the bigger role, and then learning how to execute the fundamental aspects of that part that will give the entire company a better chance of succeeding in their whole entire enterprise.
That's fascinating. So so you've defined what the purpose is by looking at what the goals of the original creator's intent were.
Precisely, but and it doesn't have to be what the playwright says it is. It doesn't have to be what
because the playwright might be different from the director
and the producers.
Okay.
So the producer has said to the playwright, "I've really enjoyed your work in the past. And what I love about it is the unique personal perspective you bring to this socio-political problem." And the playwright thinks to themselves, wow, I would really like a job. And I've kind of written everything I have to say on that. Let me just see what comes up. And so their work can be a work of discovery. And in fact, it can be a work of getting a job. You know, that is a portion of what we're all doing. That being said, they're probably still consciously and unconsciously sculpting something. And if the producer ends up saying, I like this, it will be because the producer believes that enough people will be interested in whatever event has been created. So it can be detective work for the writer, for the director, for the actors, for the designers, for the producers, to discover what it is that we're all interested in here. So it doesn't have to be like strictly dictated, you know?
So it's if the choices or not, you could say we're trying to thrill or we're trying to inspire, and ultimately that decision impacts the choices that you make in creating the character.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, there are some playwrights, like for instance, Tom Stoppard. He will have a very specific agenda with the entire piece. This is a rumination on chaos mathematics and landscape gardening as articulated through these disparate times. And you go, all right, sweet, man. How the fuck do I play that? And then David Cale, who wrote Harry Clark, he's like, I wanted to write a film noir as a one-person play. I don't know, you know, like that.
Yeah, of course.
Fascinating. So like,
that's great.
And Martin McDonagh would be like, I want to scare the fuck out of everyone in a theater. When does that happen? Never. You know, like that. That's his terrible Martin McDonagh. I don't do Martin McDonagh, but that his overall ethos is, I have scripted something to scare the fuck out of people. And that's my interest, is really destabilizing them in a place that they've gotten too comfortable with.
So it's really interesting. So the output of what it is that you're doing, it's interpretive, and you're trying to source the meaning of, or the intent of the material, and making some decision as to what's driving it, whether it's the director or the producer or the writer, and informing your choices as you then put together a role to do that.
That's the way I go about it now, Casey, but it has been a long form journey to discover that's what I'm after. And from learning all the different skills at school and watching them develop over a period of time, and crossing the threshold, by the way, the crucial threshold you have to cross as any kind of performing artist is work. that's the event for you. You have to get a fucking job. Like, so you don't have the investment immediately in understanding all of these rather esoteric ideas. What you have an interest in is this casting director going to bring me back for a callback so that I can meet the directors. So even if they don't like me for this part, they might see me for something else. You know, the intent for someone when they're starting out is pretty simple. Get a job, right, and figure out how not to get fired at that job. By the way, something I did not navigate successfully early in my career. I was fired from my first big movie job. So there is no shortage of ups and downs in this profession. And taking the time and patience and hopefully having a good group of people around you is, to me, a fundamental part of making your way through the first number of years, if you can begin to sustain a career.
I mean, it seems like I was going to ask the question of how is it different between theater and film or TV, but it seems like it's an approach that is really independent of the medium.
It is independent of the medium. Unfortunately, if, for instance, you've read a piece of material, you've discussed it with the director, you've rehearsed it with some of the other actors, you all have a sense of the way in which you're going to go about the storytelling. There's not just realism, by the way, in the portrayal of parts. There's fantasy, there's, right, mythology, right, there's Greek drama, there's tragedy, there's the gradients there, and you all have to be kind of dialed in together so that you're not in different movies, so that you're singularly telling it. Or that's the attempt. Listen, I'm often in different movies, not because I'm trying to, but because I don't quite understand the thing, or I can't get my own instrument to accommodate their needs. But in any case, like with the film or in television, you can all agree on the pretext of it. But if you're not aware of how it's being shot and how it's being lit and how it's going to be cut and scored, you might think you're doing Kramer versus Kramer when in fact you're doing Basic Instinct. Like they're two wildly different tones about the separations of relationships.
So you really have to be on the same page.
Or Fatal Attraction, I should say. Yeah,
you have to be on the same page, or you're not going to. You may be trying to deliver one thing, and it's going to limit. Right.
That's from my point of view in the collaborative storytelling. I would say that there are some points of view that are unconcerned with my plight there. Exactly. That point of view is come with whatever you want. I'm going to utilize it because what I'm doing is getting bits and pieces, and I want you to have as vivid an experience as you possibly can.
Like a Fincher who might say, try all that you.
Yeah, precisely. And let me piece it together.
Takes and interesting, right?
So.
Well, through the course of this, I've got questions about process, and it's going to be interesting as I think about the questions I want to ask you, because it's fast. I mean, it's funny because we've talked process so many times, and I've never understood that part. So that's right off the bat. So
all right, sweet. We're done. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. No, so one thing I was curious to ask was, are there things in your life that you do? And we'll talk about the physical part at one point, but I don't even mean that right now. Just things that you do in your life for your career in general, not for a specific part, but is there an approach, whether it's mentally, spiritually, I don't know, just like.
That's a great question.
Is there stuff that, and I'll open it by saying one thing too, because we have talked about this before, that there are things I know sometimes, with the kind of fame celebrity part that sometimes accompanies the acting, that we've talked about a desire to kind of to do as little of some of the press stuff as required. Obviously there's requirements, and we'll talk about that more later too, but the idea that if you're known as a public persona, then it impacts the way that you can perform, right? I mean, that may be one thing. I don't know if there's others, but.
Well, the first thing I thought of when you said that was I typically in my life, I've gone through extended periods where I really liked, needed, and benefited from exercise. There are several different reasons for that. The first of which is mental stability.
Right.
The second of which is probably personal physical health. But the third, in terms of work, is strength, flexibility, and stamina. I never worked out to get big. I worked out so that I could accommodate different roles, and I would have a body that was flexible and capable enough to sustain the choices that I wanted to make towards the storytelling end over the course of the run of a play or the run of a movie, which is, your body takes a beating when you're doing something extravagant on stage, and you have to.
I mean, it's funny. We'll talk about this more later, I'm sure. But the Elephant Man, like I think back to when you did that on stage, and the physical
perfect example.
Of that.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of them on stage. You know, Lucky and Waiting for Godot. That was like physically demanding, and you know, I had one line in the play, but it was amongst the most physically demanding, and we weren't even doing that 8 times a week. We were doing a repertory, so we only had to do it. I only had to do it 4 times a week or whatever. Right. Even still, that was one of the more demanding roles that I wouldn't have been able to achieve in the way that I did. Whether or not people liked it or didn't like it, you can't really, you can't control that. So I won't look back and say, well, it was a huge mistake because people hated it, or you know, if it was an articulated version of what I was trying to do with the company, then that's a win for me. You know, that's the enterprise that I feel like I can most confidently hang my hat on again and again. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be concerned with its apparent success or failure in the marketplace, which is important for your mental stability in the long-term course of a career. In terms of the press, I feel like I extended a tremendous amount of effort early in my career to minimize the amount of public persona I had, because I observed very early on that there was an interest in me as an actor that didn't have to do with me as an actor, that had to do with me as a model, like taking pictures, you know, for magazines. They would much rather I take pictures and keep my mouth shut. But I didn't really want to be a model either. So there was a whole bunch of confusing kind of agendas there. And there, needless to say, there were film companies, and this has been a well-known aspect of the studio system since its inception, that created stars or personas so as to make money, right? So we're the ones who have Cary Grant. You know, we're the studio that has Betty Davis. We're the studio that has Elizabeth Taylor. Well, whether or not any of those people, their public persona, bear a resemblance to who they were as people is irrelevant. The point is, the studios had control of a character that they called Cary Grant. Right. And that to me was intimidating. I wasn't terribly interested, even if, you know, we've sort of come a long way since then. Right. That was still the, it was almost
storytelling in the real world. But
well, precisely. Yeah. And so then it would give the studio the potential to make money off you, because as we've, as corporations have joined forces, we have things called media conglomerates. Right. When you do a movie for a film company that happens to be owned by the same company that owns the magazine Us, and Us wants to do a spread on you for the upcoming movie, they're making money on both sides, and you're only making money on one. And Us is still going to be responsible for making your life miserable by sending people to come take pictures of you when you look like crap. You know, like that's, so there, if you get involved in that system, you have to do it with a certain kind of agency. And the truth is, acting was already too complicated for me. I was like, can I just try to do the plays? I actually once asked a producer, I said, how much will you pay me just for the acting? Like, I don't want to do a press junket. I don't want to do any photo. I don't want to do any magazine covers. I don't want to do an interview for the Times. Like, just the acting. And he goes, 0. And I was like, fair enough. All right. Well,
it's a part of the deal.
It's a part of the deal. But the truth is,
but as an actor,
now I've gotten past the point that I was afraid of early on.
Yeah.
What I was afraid of early on, and I think it was justifiable. I never saw myself as the protagonist leading man. Those aren't the parts that I read and I go, ooh, I've got to hook in on that. I'm interested in awkward, flawed,
interesting characters. Yeah.
People who are apart from me in a way, people who are humanely very close to me. Something that I can be extravagantly expressive at, that will force me to perform in ways that I couldn't imagine that I could before. So like Elephant Man, that wasn't my idea. That was the director, Sean Matthias, and he came to me at a party one time and said, you know, I had this what I thought was interesting idea, and I'd never considered that before. That is thrilling to me, because that's again something bigger than
an audience too. Because the thing I remember so much is that you know, physically, there was no special effects or anything. It was just you physically manipulating your body to show the deformity throughout the play, which was incredible. So you watch this entire play where you're just this deformed person. And the most incredible thing, I get chills even thinking about it, was at the very end when the character passes away and you relaxed your body and you saw yourself as a person. And it was so true, because you've been witnessing this physical transformation this whole time. And it was almost like watching a special effect in real life. Like it was, it was incredible.
Well, Kevin, to the point that we were making before, the event of that play in particular is not different from what we were just talking about in terms of a public persona. Having the proximity to some kind of fame early in my career led me, I became immediately disenchanted with the engine of fame. I became disenchanted with our social discourse around fame. Who's hot? Who's not? Who's the sexiest person alive? Who is the not most sexy person alive? You know, these kinds of discussion that were devoid of any kind of discussion about their humanity, flawed as it may be, heroic as it may be, seemed to me a missed opportunity. And so what Elephant Man affords you the opportunity to do, particularly if you have high cheekbones and they can light you well, is to look really pretty in one light, and then in front of the audience's eyes, transform yourself into something that, John Merrick was a carnival sideshow.
Right.
The label was grotesque. So it was a sort of perfect way to talk. And the entire play talks about him just saying, can you see my humanity? Can you see my humanity? Right. So that was my point, is there's not really any difference between somebody who looks different than he does when we're all just struggling to describe our humanity. And that moment allowed us to codify it to a single theatrical event that hopefully was both thrilling and thought-provoking, you know.
You know, it's funny because this is just naturally going right to the thing I wanted to ask you about in a different section, right? I mean, I wanted to talk first about the way that you viewed acting. And then I want to step into, okay, how do you consider a role? Well, you're clearly indicating what that is. But it's, we've talked about when you get a script, you get a play in the past, that you're really not looking at the story in general. It's really more about like what it is that you do and right and how you approach it. And I don't know if you
illuminate
that on that.
Well, obviously the constituent components of any project are a major factor. If there are people whose work I've admired before, I'm going to have a certain tendency to want to accommodate a role. If they're, right, whether it's a playwright or a director or a producer, or there's other actors involved. Again, since it's a collaborative environment, I want to be around people who are going to teach me something, inspire me, that I'm going to have to live up to expectations that I will be hard and force growth and change, right, and observation and self-evaluation and all of those things.
What team you're a part of is going to elevate you. Yeah,
I think so. And
right,
that's not always the case, but often that's a place that I start. The second, with particular respect, is the writing. I have to be able to identify something about the writing. I find it interesting. I find the subject matter interesting enough. All of those things, they can be immediate obstacles.
Right.
The crucial thing is if neither of those are obstacles, then it's the part. Is this a part that I feel like I can personally be effective in? Do I know something about that character? Am I curious about something about that character? Do I have a particular powerful feeling when I read that? It's often amorphous. For instance, on the morning show, in the pilot that I read, he starts going off on the state of journalism and entertainment in the television sector at a certain point. And he becomes easily charmed by his own understanding of it and talks for pages. So for me as an actor, I'm reading that thinking, who the fuck thinks they can talk like that? Meanwhile, as I'm talking about acting on and on, but at least I'm being asked. He wasn't being asked in that moment, but he's got a very clear, thorough, potentially insane idea about the current state of journalism and is explaining to somebody how he's going to leverage an entire corporate infrastructure around that insight. That's a very extravagant persona, and one that I feel like I've encountered in several iterations here in New York. Like there's a certain kind of ambitious personality shark, right, is one way of putting it, that you encounter at various like galas and stuff who've bought 2 tables for 50 grand and just so that they can invite right, who they want to be around people because they think they're super sharp and they want to test it in the social environment. I see that a lot. And I'm sure they want to give it to the charity too, but
there's other motives.
There's other motives as well. He, to me, seemed to be one of those kinds of guys. And on the thing that was most interesting to me is he didn't seem stressed out about it. He seemed kind of excited by it. That is not something I identify with at all. Everything stresses me out. And I feel self-conscious about everything. I'm going to cry. I'm going to be in a puddle of tears of shame after this is over, considering all the bullshit that I spouted. But the notion that he was so far away from me and that it was written with such extravagance, that was my hook in. I was like, that's a character I would love to play. I can't figure it out yet. There are other parts where you feel like, oh, I know how to do that. Like
it's like getting into somebody else's head and trying to inhabit that space for a time. And
that's to me, that's a very humane like journey. Not many people are privileged enough to get to experience that.
Well, I'm curious. You mentioned, other the importance of other directors or writers and other, I would assume, other cast or crew, right? You said, is there anything, I'm curious, again, we've had this conversation too before, if there's sometimes filmmakers who might come with maybe more than an idea. I mean, maybe it's fleshed out, but not a full script. And it is requiring some form of improv or workshopping to develop something, is that?
Yeah, I haven't had that experience too often, not the least of which because it's intimidating to me. I didn't grow up or, develop as an actor with that particular skill set. I'm becoming more understanding and appreciating of it now, but I definitely preferred seeing the words, understanding the words, knowing the words weren't going to change, and then slowly trying to find my way into inhabiting them in a way that's helpful.
Right.
As opposed to, Billy, what do you think dramaturgically about this movement in the second act? I don't fucking know, dude. I'm just happy I got the job, bro. Stop freaking me out. That's
it's enough to focus on what it is that you're talking about, which is inhabiting and making choices, even with the words there. Is a lot.
Precisely,
right?
Precisely. And I have plenty of colleagues and friends that certainly look at me disdain with that point of view because they have that kind of agency.
Right.
They understand dramaturgy, they understand writing, they understand the sort of what I would call the primary creative force, whereas I feel like I'm a secondary creative force. I come in afterwards and go, oh, I see the score that you've written. Let me show you how I could play it.
Right.
And so there was an exception though with Almost Famous because Cameron had written, I think the movie was called Untitled at that time, in no small part because he hadn't finished it yet. Like there was something.
He was trying to figure out the ending.
I think he had the ending. I think he was trying to figure out. I'm sure there were plenty of things that he was figuring out, but with Russell in particular, the character that I played, he was trying to figure out how to balance the necessity of him being a mysterious figure with an audience's need to see something of him in order to identify with him. So the relationships between the kid as a reporter, between Kate's character, they hadn't quite evolved in a way that he found like satisfaction yet. It still felt elusive to him. There was something he was after and he couldn't kind of get his finger on it. And so we went out and we rehearsed for, I think we were there 5 or 6 weeks. I mean, we had to do band practice too. Because I didn't play guitar, and which is fine if you're playing a guy who doesn't play guitar, but when you're playing a guy who's supposed to be great at guitar, like exceptionally great, it's not fine.
I'm going to bring this up later too.
It's a real problem, particularly for some audience members who play guitar, because then in the middle of the movie, they're watching it with everybody and they're like, bullshit. Sorry, I just couldn't help. I mean, I'm a guitarist. That's what I do. There's, and that is in every audience for all times. You have to always, there was a great Simpsons, I'm always quoting the Simpsons. I do adore them, but there was a great Simpsons about this in particular, this one thing in particular about why to be expert when you need to be expert, or why to learn how to fool people about being expert well enough so that you don't take them out of the movie. Barney, he decides to get sober and he wants to become a helicopter pilot. And so he's up there, he got some coupon to be a helicopter pilot, and he's up there with the helicopter pilot. And the helicopter pilot says to him, yeah, you ever see that movie where Elvis plays a helicopter pilot? And Marty's like, no, I haven't. He's like, oh, ridiculous. Not at all. I didn't see Elvis in that part for a second. And meanwhile, like the helicopter's going all over the place. But that's what you're up against every time. So you better make certain that when you take on a role, for instance, like as a runner or as a guitar player, or what other things have I had to do that I can't remember at the moment. Oh, like ride horses and rope cattle. That you have to do it well enough to just try to trick the majority of the people. There's always going to be people who they can't wait to see how you screwed it up, because that's there. I mean, I'm happy now we've got a term for them.
Same people like
trolls. And that's what we call those people, trolls. Okay, if that's your only interest.
Find continuity errors in the movie.
Yeah, precisely, trolls. In any case, we have to entertain trolls too, and so that it's really a question of numbers, like making sure you get the most of them.
Funny, but
yeah, behind you, but just so that the story can be told. Sorry.
But so no, when you're talking, so you know, one of the things I was going to ask is like when you look at something like Almost Famous with Cameron, and knowing the potential of it, even though it may not be fully formed, it's something that sometimes you'd be open to knowing what it is.
It's a very rare occasion. It took it being Cameron Crowe and
something, you know,
yeah, and something extravagant. Yeah.
Just curious. Is there, you know, in the way that people present you stuff, you know, I know as a producer, sometimes we try to put together, you know, a reel that shows work or a pitch book or something. I mean, any thought about the effectiveness of good examples of that and trying to communicate story? Does it matter to you, or is it really just about what's on the page?
Well, people have done a phenomenal job, I think, over the past 10 years using that platform to their advantage. So when I was talking to you earlier about being on the same page creatively with the text, with the other actors, with the director, and then seeing the movie and discovering you were doing something else,
right?
A lookbook is a hedge against that problem. And it also gives you some insight into their capacity to curate a feeling visually, which is what they're going to be doing anyway. You know,
right?
It's just one is a static,
a sizzle reel, or a pitch book or something that's giving.
So a pitch book would be static,
it's about
right?
Tone.
It's about tone and understanding again how to curate a moment. So a pitch book that's 340 pages long, that might not be a great pitch book. Why? Because you haven't understood the form that you're sending this to somebody to give them an abbreviated version of what the whole thing. All you want to do is allude to things.
Right.
You might have everything in your head. You might have every frame scrutinized and everything, but that's not what a pitch book is. It's like you can't make a 4-hour short film. That's missing the entire idea of that platform. So people who are able to use lookbooks and pitch books and sizzle reels in an effective way, I've seen that grow exponentially over the last 10 years. I think in no small part because people are able to do it themselves. And I highly encourage it now. It's the number of times, you know, that it has added something to my understanding of a particular filmmaker's potential. It is innumerable. The number of times that it's really distracted are minuscule. So I think the only ways that you can distract is by making something too long or by sort of exceeding.
It's almost like if you don't, it could display that you don't really yet know what you're trying to accomplish if you don't do it right.
Well, there's no question about that. Right. But you can also, you know, write a screenplay. I'll just use a reference, a movie that my son and I have watched, a series of movies my son and I have watched over the last several months. But you could write the screenplay of The Freshman. Do you remember The Freshman?
Yeah.
Marlon Brando, Bruno Kirby, Matthew Broderick, Frank Whaley.
That's a great.
Penelope Miller. Terrific cast.
So funny.
It's about a kid who's going to film school.
Right.
And they do an interesting meta thing there, which is they're studying The Godfather in film class, and meanwhile Marlon Brando is playing a underworld figure who's hired him as an assistant. So there's a number of different, funny and interesting things going on there. But my point being, you could do a lookbook of the freshmen that's like The Godfather, right? So you're using all this Godfather imagery and stuff because that's kind of tangentially a part of it, but that's not the movie you're making. Right. Even though
you would be throwing somebody off if you,
I mean, that's I'm trying to use a like high and low part. So you don't want to tell somebody you can make Apocalypse Now when this is the first film that you're making and you've only got a budget of $30,000.
I mean, at the core of it, the Freshman's a romantic comedy.
That's all it is, exactly. And it's a sweet, lovely one, and kind of a hijinks comedy too, So, you really want more like Chevy Chase images. But
no, it's really good notes for students too, like when you're,
because you will want to be ambitious as a student. You will want to say, what I'm aiming for is Apocalypse Now, what I'm aiming for, but you have to be realistic with the people that you're communicating with. So understanding what that forum actually is.
It also makes you articulate what it is that you're trying to do if you go through this process.
Great point. And if you can navigate that in a way that doesn't obfuscate your script with its over ambition, I think it can be really useful.
So last part on the considering roles thing, you have worked with friends who are directors, curious just in that, when something like that happens, somebody that you've worked with before, Bart Freundlich, Justin Thoreau, right? Both friends are directors and bring you stuff. Is there, a thought, when something like that comes about, and extra care, obviously, because there's personal relationship there. I don't know. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts.
Well, I think what you said is absolutely right. Extra care. Because it's a personal relationship, and none of this is as important to me as personal relationships. And all of it is very important, so I don't take it for granted. It's not some like easy breezy way, walk my way into dedication. I'm like, I know how to play this guy. Let me shave my head and be angry. Like that. It is never how I approach it.
No matter what the circumstance, you've done a good job of
take care. That's the crucial part of it, because
I asked
the language.
By the way, I asked this because again, students, they're gonna end up having this kind of situation all the time. Right?
So I would say this: the language of a friendship is different than the language of a hierarchical creative collaboration. Right. So a friendship should be based upon a lack of hierarchy. It should be based upon a mutual admiration of your humanity. There has to be in a film, unless you're doing some incredible, like, Swedish collective venture where everybody's the director and everybody's the actor, which I've never heard of, then there will be a hierarchy. And that hierarchy will bring to the forefront the people's egos. So, well, I want to stand here. I can't have you stand there. The lighting is not right. Lighting looks fine to me. God, Kevin, you're such a dick. You're always like this, man. I always want to go to Prince Street Bar. And you're always like, no, we got to stay home and drink tequila at home. I'm like that part of it, it can go like that.
South, right.
So to your point before of taking care, just take care. Don't take it for granted that this is a relationship that can work without observation, is what I would say. I mean, Bart and I have done 3 movies together, some of which we have spoken the exact same language for the entirety of the shoot, the same pursuit. I mean, some of which like he did not want to talk to me at all because everything I had to say was wrong, or he had a different agenda and was just hoping that I would take care of my part so he could figure out some of the other shit that he had to take care of, so
he's dealing with his own shit.
Precisely. And so I can't bring the expectation that I had in the first one to the second one. I have to observe that, we're at different places in our creative life. And so I think you said it best. Take care.
Yeah, good. Okay. I guess to pause for a second, Jacob, is there anything I've kind of gone through the list? I feel like I kind of tackled the things I want to do. Is there anything you might point out just through the considering of roles?
You guys have been not only informative, but really just fantastically entertaining. So thank you guys so much. I'm so happy that this is coming out. I really don't have anything to tack on.
Good. Okay. I mean, I'm able to go through so far. I will check in after each section.
Awesome.
But good. All right. We're going to go into, so now we're going to go into, once you've accepted a role, how you make a decision about making that interpretation, right? And we've talked a little bit about this, but that you're getting a script or a play, it lays out the scenes, it lays out, interaction with other characters, it lists out your dialogue, but ultimately, you're making choices about the way that you're delivering all of that, right? So is there, that's really kind of what I want to talk about with this. Is there a process that you go through when you're first handed material and you've said, okay, I'm going to do this to get into that character and how you're going to play it?
Yes, there is. And it's not uniform. So it's not as though I have a playbook and I go, okay, page 1, start with gestures. Let me try a couple of, that's not him. It is, like that. It is not that for me. It is, you start with the script. And if you don't have the benefit of rehearsals, you have to rehearse yourself, which means you just read it again and again and again and again. You read it hopefully with friends or with people you've hired, or you read it yourself. You have to start to accommodate the feeling of those words coming out of your body. And you have to find the place at which they feel authentic. Because not every character can say the same words coming from your body and sound authentic. I don't know a less convoluted way to say that.
Well, it's funny because so the other night we were watching a movie with Giacomo and talking about one of the actors and the performance in that movie, and he was really, and without even really thinking about it, Francesca and I were having a conversation about feeling like it wasn't authentic, like it wasn't a particularly well done performance. And we got into it, like Giacomo was like, oh, he's totally like, that's the guy, like he's, it was kind of funny. Right. And we were talking about, we were kind of trying to explain this, like, and it was, an over emotional, it was just kind of a clunky thing. Yeah. To him, it was like right on target. It was really funny. Like he just, and it was, I don't want to say it wasn't a cartoon character, it was live action, but it was a hero movie. And it was, for him, it was perfectly fine. You know what I mean? And so, it's funny because where do you, it's like, what is that? The old Larry Flint thing. It's like, I don't know. I don't know how to define porn, but I know it when I see it. But it's
I hadn't heard that.
Huh?
I said I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's but it's like, I don't know a great performance. How do you define it? But it's like you can feel it in a way.
Well,
it's like
I can guarantee you, for every consensus great performance, there are people out there, and I won't even call these people trolls, but there are people out there who don't share that aesthetic. So there is no universal thing. This idea of an Academy Award or a Tony or an Emmy or whatever, this is not given by the great ethereal agency of performing gods handed down to us from millennia. This is just a bunch of dudes and ladies looking around going, I like that. And one guy going, I did. And they go, shut up, Charlie. And then we're going to give them the prize. You know, it's just people with feelings. And so
which is kind of funny to look at everything that's happening with the Hollywood Foreign Press.
Well, yeah, well, they've got a lot of feelings, a lot of different kinds of feelings, and some of them are not appropriate and have never been appropriate, but people put up with them because they were used in the capitalist economy. In any case, so that notion of possession of authenticity, at a certain point, you have to resolve yourself as an actor that you have your own version of that needs priority, because it will give you the greatest likelihood of achieving something in that collaborative environment. Because if you're insecure, if you're self-conscious, you're already fucked. You cannot perform in a way for very long, for sustained periods of time at a place of fear. You have to find some level of confidence and commitment in what you're doing. And that comes from believing in your aesthetic, believing in your choices of what's authentic, and or working in concert with the other creative team to patiently find your way to the authentic iteration of it. So when we talked before about character acting and stuff, and really gravitating towards things that are very different than me, when I say they're different than me, I mean that they're really different in me in a way that I can't quite imagine, which means as I start to experiment with this character, it's going to ring like red flags everywhere of inauthenticity. What you have to, or what I do, is I sort of triangulate, you know, I kind of find over a period of time, and this is time, like, you know, it's time with the text saying it over and over again, like where is it that sounds right? Where is it in my where's the voice physically located? What is the speech pattern? What is the action? What is the accent? How do they manage motivations? How do they experience emotions? You know, all of those sorts of things come into question just in time. You have to ask questions, question after question, but you have to be able to tolerate it being incredibly inauthentic for a while if it's something that's a reach for you. Conversely, there could be something that's right in your wheelhouse, and you might overestimate your proximity to it. And if, in fact, it is incredibly authentic to you, but it's not terribly dramatic, you know? So there are some times when the authenticity, you're starting at the authentic place, but that authentic place is not terribly entertaining, and you have to find how to expand on that authenticity.
It goes back to what you were saying. What's the purpose of what it is that you're trying to do?
Well, that's why you try to start with this bare bone things of an event. What is this event that we're trying to do tonight? And you know, this is not the way everybody thinks, or probably not many people think like this, but it helps me to get a grasp on getting like my best possible chance at being authentic in that part. At least when the majority of the people see this, I won't be the one dragging it down. You know, I won't be the one where you go, well, Crudup never really got a handle on that part. It happens, obviously. And for every part that people like me in, there are people who hate that same part. You know, you have to begin to tolerate that, which is not a fun thing to tolerate, you know, as a people pleaser. Accommodating that can have, you know, different dramatic effects. You know, people can psychologically tear themselves apart trying to get the world to like them. And you see it again and again in this business. You can see it in any business. It's a public profile business. And it's unpleasant and destabilizing and not particularly helpful for your art, you know. So,
well, I'm curious. So I know, you know, it's funny, in knowing that we were going to talk, I went back and was reading about different methods of acting, right? I was just to refresh my own mind, and it was funny to go back and look at it. And I know, talking about school, that you guys practically studied everything, right? And so is there any, going from classical, Stanislavski, Meisner, to me, when I was thinking through it, it's almost like it goes from, almost technical interpretation and machination to trying to almost like unconsciously embody something, right? It's like a spectrum in a sense, right? Is there any of it any particular one that resonated with you? Did it all kind of mold into, what is now your own method?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. When you started to bring that up, Kevin, about the different disciplines or people's ideas of the
ways that people
they're really formulas, right? So each of those particular brands is a formula
of how to interpret it,
how to act.
How to act.
That's it. So, and
it's interesting. Yeah.
Some of those people who are incredibly smart decided at some point the ambiguity is too excruciating, that it would be so much better if there was a formula for doing this again and again.
That you could just plug in.
That you plug into whatever material comes your way throughout the course of your life. As your own body changes, you just stick with the plan. And
you just kind of plug it in your ear, and
that you have A plus B plus C minus D equals a minor career, or a very major career, right. In fact.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, when you look at the different methods and people that embrace them. And
no question about it. And I would say there are some people who have applied the formula of just go to the light. If people like how you're doing a certain character, keep doing that and do it every time in every character.
Right.
Because you'll continue to work if people like it. That's a certain acting strategy. Right. There are other acting strategies that have all sorts of tools within them, but I wouldn't be able to say I've studied them, because each of those disciplines requires like a lifelong study. You have to be like a committed Catholic. That's
right.
Like, don't stray now and just, try out Judaism on this role, because you're not going to understand it. You never read the Torah. There is a portion of those that really is about dogmatic thinking. Mm-hmm. And the way that I was introduced to studying acting was, you sort of said it yourself, and it was infuriating because, I was going $80,000 in debt at graduate school, taking out student loans. And essentially Ron Van Loo and Zelda Fitch-Handler, they're like, what we're giving you is as many tools as we can possibly provide in 3 years, so that you may then pick the tools that work best for you in the development of your lifelong career as a performing artist. I'm like, fuck you. Give me that formula, motherfucker.
Just give me the one thing that I can plug in.
However, that being said, that has been an enormous gift, because what it really does is it gives you agency and it gives you curiosity. Like, it's a boundless curiosity about the changing nature of your own instrument as it applies, not just for storytelling, but in the marketplace of storytelling, which are two kind of distinctly different things. So if we lived in a country where there was a national endowment of the arts, you could take up residence at a repertory theater for a certain wage and play parts there the rest of your life. And played various kinds of parts in different plays, and that's an interesting performing living. That's not really experimenting with the marketplace in a dynamic way. That's finding a life as a performing artist, which is fabulous and fantastic. Yeah. We don't actually live in that country now, so it is all marketplace everywhere. We gave up on the National Endowment of the Arts in any substantive way, because people got all, clutching their pearls about people doing plays that they didn't like. So the desire to hold on to, the past and your experience with theater can often be a hindrance in the creation and embracing of new and novel voices.
Right.
And to me, that's what keeps the theater going and alive. And I think it's in no small part why we import a lot of our plays. But irrespective of that, the notion of finding a creative voice in the marketplace it is one that I think it is addressed by having your own methodology that changes over time. So you can observe what's working, you can observe what's not working, you can self-evaluate, you can continue to try to find the authenticity in the various roles that you play and not stick to any one game plan other than storytelling.
You're kind of leading into my next question, which is depending upon the character type or the genre, does it, do you still kind of approach it all in the same way? Have you learned
so you just made different choices, I mean, right. I'm sure somebody has done a much,
you're doing a drama versus you're playing a villain in Mission Impossible. It's
I mean, I'm sure there is some my son was taking this improvisational comedy class. Wow. And we fortunately were able to see them do exercises at the end of this year.
Wow. They
did 4-hour-long shows, completely improvised. And one of the games that they would play, it was spectacular. And one of the games that they would play was they would get genres from the audience. So you would say Western, telenovela, porn, tragedy, rom-com, soap opera, documentary series, local news or whatever, and then you've got somebody who's curating. One of the students is curating the moment. So they've got 8, different genres or whatever. And then they ask the audience for, a seed idea, which is, it could be anything. You're buying potato chips at the bodega, right? All of a sudden the scene starts to evolve and they start off with, telenovela where they walk in and they're like, I could really, really use some potato chips and I need them right now. What was that, Doc? And they're like, Western. And they're like, because if I don't get those potato chips in the right time, partner, you and I are going to have problems. So all of those are, watching them do it kind of illuminated to me the choices. You're always trying to find, to them, the purpose is to get a laugh, right?
Right.
So how can I use these genres at different times? How flexible am I to be able to use these genres at different times for the purpose
of comedy,
of promoting a laugh in the audience,
Yeah.
So to your point before, it shouldn't be relegated to any one particular thing. You should be able to do a public service announcement and you still some kind of comedy.
If you approach it with the same
purpose, with what's the purpose,
right?
And what's working, like that.
So there's been a number of times where you've portrayed real people. And it's interesting to think about this in the context of everything that we're saying, right? So, Philip Zimbardo in the Stanford Prison Experiment, Stephen Prefontaine, Without Limits. And then I remember there was a story that you've told me about with Tim Geithner on the Too Big to Fail, where you had the opportunity in a taxi cab ride, right? You got the one,
I can't say that happened or didn't happen, Kevin, but there have been times that I have encountered people that I've played.
Yeah.
In fact, Dr. Zimbardo came to the set at a certain point, and he he had been, I think, a tremendous resource for the screenwriter.
Right.
And as somebody who's portraying them, you feel an enormous responsibility. Or I don't want to generalize. I have felt an enormous responsibility. In fact, during Steve Prefontaine, one of his ex-girlfriend, if not like the love of his life in high school, she showed me and sent me copies of the letters that they used to write to one another.
Wow.
And it was beautiful and heartbreaking, and because obviously he had been gone a long time, and but what she was exposing was the depth of his adolescent humanity, and that's not the figure that he was in the public persona. He was sort of met iconography level, and particularly in the running world and in the Nike world. And when you reach iconography, one of the things that it does is it robs you of all your humanity, because we use those icons as like aspirational goals, so they can't be fractured real people because we need them to be bigger than life. But for the people who actually encountered those people, that iconography steals something from them. So you begin to feel a responsibility. I felt an enormous responsibility when I was playing him because of the reality of those letters. So I confess it's an awkward and odd variable to to impose on what is already an awkward and odd enterprise. And it's been welcome and thrilling, and a real well, you feel gratitude at the opportunity
To do something like that.
to do something like that, to tell somebody's story. It was actually, it's a privilege, but certainly that privilege has a weight of responsibility, I think. Was that what you were going to ask?
Yeah. No, it's how well, and this goes to it too. Well, I have a follow-on question to that, and then I'll go to the other thing I was going to say, which is when you're doing it, you don't want it to become an impersonation, right? So it's like.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was the question you were asking too. No, because it is tangentially related too.
So it's like you're portraying them, but
I can remember it's a fantastic dialect coach named Tim Monick, who I've worked with several times, and he was working with Donald Sutherland on that and worked with me on that. And you have the benefit of recordings. You have the benefit of their voice on tape.
Wow. Yeah.
And you have the benefit
or in person.
Right. And you have the benefit of interpreting that. And I think it's a judgment call based upon your time, your flexibility, your capability. There are some characters that I'm sure I could do, like just off the top of my head. I could do my dad right now. Look at you say, hot damn, Casey, it's beautiful to see you. And realize teal was still a color people were wearing, but nonetheless, you're a tremendous young man, one that I'm privileged to have spent so much time with. Like that just comes and whether or not that's a character that resonates as authentic to somebody else, it doesn't matter to me. That's like coming out of my bones, So with Steve Prefontaine, when I would listen to those recordings, I can't do him now, but he had a kind of authority, like inertia of truth behind him. He believed. He didn't give a rat's ass at 19 or 20 years old that he was talking to the head of the Commission of National College, the IOC or whatever it was called. He was just like, well, I think that's a load of horse shit. I mean, if you take a look at it, there's no reason that these people, they shouldn't be stuck living in hovels while they're making money for you guys to dance around like a bunch of, pigs in mud. And I'm thinking, holy shit, how do you have that kind of charisma and so there was one, like doing that accent is getting a hold of something true in him, which you want, right? So you're trying to get the truth of him.
Right.
So sometimes there's a proximity to the two of them. But when I see that performance, or when I've seen portions of that performance in the past, I know the moments that I got it right, and I know the moments that I didn't get it right.
That's interesting.
And like I sit there, and Robert Town, he would constantly say, would you watch this back on playback, or would you listen to this? And I'd be like, no, I can't. Like, I don't want to be self-conscious, Robert. You know, like I was like very dictatorial about my own process then, which was bullshit. I mean, that was just, that was me being scared. Oh, incredibly. Now, I mean, you
can watch it and understand, like,
well, now I don't have the same kind, I have more capability with my resources. So if I see what I'm doing is an overreach, I know how to simplify it, so that it at the very least gives the story the continuity of authenticity, as opposed to, well, and there's a moment Billy really tried something. You know, good on him for trying. Which is what it feels like, you know, when you do something that doesn't work.
Is having the recordings like that helpful? I mean,
it's incredible. This is what I was going to be about Tim Monick. So I'm sitting there doing the accent with him, which it's a very pedantic exercise. The one for me, where when I do accents, which is the first stage, is you go over every single word and you pick out the sounds that you share in common, and you pick out the sounds that you don't share in common, and you identify why you don't share them in common, and you come up with the symbology. There's a uniform alphabet, a phonetic alphabet that's different than the one that's like just on the in the dictionary. But that it can describe in a little bit more detail that we learned in college, and you put those symbols over those words in your script, so that when you read those things, you see those symbols and you try to form your mouth around them. You then listen to repeated exercises of people doing that kind of sound again and again and again. You know, I mean,
to get that part right.
That being said, it's a process.
Right.
So if they start shooting while you're in the middle of that process, becoming in your full possession, you're going to see
incomplete work.
Work. That's the best way to put it.
That's tough. I mean, well, when we get into process, I'm gonna have questions around rehearsal and stuff, which I'll skip that for a second. But do you, like, when you're thinking about forming a character, like to have a hold of the context that's explicit behind the script, right? So it's like, do you get into a discussion about what's not on the page? You know,
absolutely. Those are some of the most important questions you can ask. And that to me, it usually comes like in the third week of a play rehearsal. And that's the moment when you're clear that what you're working on is a big piece of shit, and you are the biggest piece of shit in it. Because all of a sudden, all the questions that you didn't ask become readily apparent. Like, oh, right, where am I coming from in this moment that I enter? Like, and I know I said
something on the page and you're saying these
I know
words,
it says he came in from an argument. Okay, I came in from argument. Let me come in, like when I do the first reading, let me come in really like hot and bothered. Well, why don't you take 5 minutes and articulate what that argument was precisely, and then take another 5 minutes and draw it up in your mind so that you can have the experience ready for you. That takes it's just specific time consuming work that needs to be done in order to feel fulfilled and like truthful, and that it's happening in the moment. It related to something that we were just talking about with accents. I can't remember now.
When you're in the middle of trying to work through the process, and
I don't know. I'll come back to how did you start the question?
That particular question.
Yeah.
It's just saying, it's like how much of what's not on the page is critical as you're thinking through this, right?
Right.
So you're
I'll say this.
You're forming this character.
Yeah.
And you're having to make those choices. And the part B to this
I know what I was going to say.
Well, go ahead. No.
Well, it had to do with accents and authenticity, and it relates to what you're saying now. And a word that we use again and again, commitment. So when I did Harry Clark, which was the story of like this one guy tells a story, and in the story, we decided that I was going to manifest other parts of the story so that it appeared as so the audience would have the appearance that they were watching scenes happen between different kinds of characters. And
so was that not in the original material?
It wasn't. It wasn't delineated specifically in that way.
I should preface this by saying, so the play that we're talking about was a one-man show in which you basically play somebody who is telling a story.
That's right.
But as you're telling the story, you're taking on, it's almost like you're a character who's telling a story who then in that character is also doing the roles of other people as you're telling the story. Right?
Correct.
So it's like a play within a play almost.
Correct. And it's a similar kind of enterprise as Elephant Man, which is there's a bait and switch where at the end, when the lights come up, the audience is like, oh crap, that was just one dude. I love being in theater. You know, like that's what you really want is, I was totally taken. I kind of saw some of those other characters for a while because the director is doing something sophisticated with the lighting. You know, Leah's doing, she's got little sound cues that make it appear as though it's happening. But what I was going to say was, I had to do several different accents in that, some of which were British accents. And, you know, I'm no Meryl Streep, let me put it that way, okay? I'm barely Billy Crudup. And my dialect work is effortful and sometimes works. What really works, I've discovered over time, what Tim was trying to allude to me early on, what I was too stubborn about, which is commitment is 9/10 of the fucking journey. If the audience believes that I am fully committed and invested to this story, if there are little sounds that, you know, don't quite work or whatever, it'll be a hindrance to them, but it won't be enough to take them out of the effectiveness of the storytelling.
It's not taking you out of the moment.
It's not taking you out of the moment. And it might, you know, for a second be like, ah, crap, I wish it, but if you have a commitment to the energy behind the story, and in that one, there was an enormous urgency behind the storytelling, you can get away with a lot of flawed sounds. And even though I know the sounds, I could do them in certain ways, sometimes you just choke under the pressure and, you know, you got something else on your mind, or you're, you know, in a situation like that.
Or you're doing a performance.
I choke regularly.
You're doing a performance over and over and over again, and you're.
Yes, and you can actually start to go the other direction and miss the sound entirely. And I had, you know, a terrific dialect coach, Liz Smith, who's worked with me since 1995 on other stuff. But Tim, when I asked him about doing the dialect, he said, "Well, you're not trying to do an impersonation, are you?" And my response at the time was, "No, I'm trying to be him."
Right.
And for me, that meant you shouldn't be able to tell the difference, which means I should sound exactly like him in every way possible, which was like, it kind of was and wasn't what Tim was saying. Was like, if you're really going for an impersonation, man, you better be able to back that shit up because it's going to sound inauthentic.
Right.
And I was saying, I'm going to do both, you know, like stubborn jackass.
Well, when you're going through, so the part B was to this is when you're going through this process of thinking through like what's not on the page, you know, who are your collaborators in that? And it's, you know, I would imagine it's obvious. It's the director, it's the playwright, the screenwriter, maybe not so much the screenwriter depending on the circumstance, but, what does that look like?
And the other actors, and not to mention the designers, because you can have all the.
Well, I was going to ask that to other crews. So is it?
Well, yes. I mean, listen. Yeah, you have all this
art,
intent on the
wardrobe,
the inherent power of this character that you're playing, and how everybody observes them as the central, most powerful person. And that's the way you've read it. You haven't really talked about it with anyone else. And then, you have dress rehearsal, and the costume designer gives you this like long kind of hat with a big feather in it that is like only meant to key in on your absurdity as a character. Right? That's when you can begin to have the discussion of how you view, with your designing collaborators. That happens in a myriad of ways with other actors, with the director, with the playwright. It's oftentimes the director in a film won't want the writer around. Whereas it's oftentimes a television show that I've experienced, the writer doesn't want the director around. There's
who's the power figure, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, precisely. And
who's really calling the creative shots?
In a play, I have found, by and large, a much more clear collaborative enterprise where the director is in charge, the playwright has built the ship, and you guys have to figure out how to sail it and man the different versions of it. But if you have a question about where the keel is, if you want to know how secure, you go to the playwright. If you want to know where it's going, and if you've got a good chance of getting there, the director has that. Otherwise, stick to the sails, Billy.
It's funny because I've seen that some in the 24-hour plays, which we've done together, seeing how that's always come out, and every once in a while, you'll ask the writer, what were you trying to, when you get stuck, and it's like, what is it here? Like, what are you thinking here? And, right.
Well, in the 24-hour plays, what they might be thinking was, I got to finish this fucking thing and get some sleep, which, by the way, is a healthy motivation, and one that gives you an opportunity to then interpret.
Right.
Like you say, okay, fair enough, I've got an idea on it.
Right. And then you can go with it.
And then you can go with it. Yeah, precisely. Where like Martin McDonagh, he had these monologues in The Pillow Man, which were actually stories that he wrote when he was 18. They're lengthy, and it's no easy exercise for any actor to internalize them, and because you're not reading them, you're telling them. I'm for being word perfect. That's always my intent. It was incredibly challenging in this particular circumstance with that material and that much text, without the help of other actors, sometimes when you've got dialogue with other actors, their cues allow you to reorganize yourself for your next chunk to say, so you can reset. But when you're doing it by yourself, sometimes you get lost in the midst of it, and you try to make sure that you've got the entire thread right. And sometimes you reorganize words consciously, unconsciously, or whatever. Martin couldn't stand any of it. Like I would do, if I remember the first couple of times I even got through it, he was like, well, I guess got through it as something, next time maybe you should do the words, like that kind of. So there are different experiences with different writers. Right. David in Harry Clark, man, I was trying so hard. We went back and recorded the audible after we had finished our last run of it. And so I had the actual script there. And if I got anything right, I'd be surprised. I mean, I got the story right, but the number of words that I confused, got wrong, dropped out, replaced. And David didn't care, because
he's trying to get across something.
His interest was the story,
right, and
getting this film noir, and that we were perfectly aligned with it.
Right. So when you're working in that context, and this is kind of, again, leading into this question, which is, you know what the big picture is as you work through it and you get to the little picture, right? So like little moments, little mannerisms. I mean, do you let those things naturally occur? Is there a process that you go through that makes a choice that says, I think at this moment I'm going to pick up this thing and take my drink and put it back down, or is it?
Yes.
That's with the director? And
yes.
Right.
Yes, so you do all of that, and sometimes it's of interest to you. The material is leading you that way, consciously or unconsciously, and you have a desire to use behavior to illuminate something, some reality that's happening. In fact, watch any of Brando's stuff. He was specifically using behavior all the time, and I suspect it was a mixture of him locating himself in the reality that he needed to do these things so he could feel grounded in the reality, and also something for the audience to feel as though this is a real world environment and they're not just doing heightened Greek tragedy
to connect to.
So yeah, he's doing The Godfather, and you'll see him in the middle of a scene where he's about to kill somebody, and he's doing all sorts of things with his hands on his face, and he sees his flower, and he's telling this guy he's about to kill him while he's fixing his flower. And that's a modern invention. I mean, James Dean, in the idea of studying the method, Stanislavski's method, and all the guys that were involved in the early infancy of that, what they hated in the stylized acting of Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor was that there was no reality in the behavior. I've never met anyone who talked like this to me. Never, like that's. But that was that's how we had performing.
Getting into more and more authentic.
So that's what they were trying to do.
That was like stage acting, or
there was a realism that was missing from the potential of film that they were dead set on uncovering. And the truth is, I'm not entirely sure if this is precisely where it came from, but Anton Chekhov, who was a playwright in Russia, wrote some fascinating but they're canon in theater. When you are growing up as a theater artist, or learning how to be an actor, or going to see repertory play, you will see Chekhov. One of the reasons that I think it's known that it was so impactful is he wrote about the banality of existence and made it dramatic. That was not what people were writing. That's not how people were creating drama before that.
It was like basic family.
Just behavior. Right. They're having dinner. That's this scene. Right. They're having dinner. What? That's a scene? Cut. So in order to make the banality of that interesting, the addition of realism, real behavior, dishes actually making noises while people are talking, spilling something. Right. He constantly was writing shit for his characters. Like, I want to say it was in The Cherry Orchard. There's a guy named Yippee Hodoff. I think I'm right. I could be wrong, but he had a squeaky shoe. Like, what? And it would slowly become a feature of the entirety of the character and everything else.
That's funny.
But so those actors were part of a tradition that has now formed what we understand. Well, actually, until the superhero movement. Formed what we understood about realistic acting. Superhero acting has required us to kind of like advance that back to where we were before about playing archetypes again, So we're doing Greek tragedy again, but in the form that people had felt like they were gonna get a hold of realism, right? With the everybody in the 70s and Dog Day Afternoon and
So funny,
Yeah.
but yeah, I never thought about that. It's like the mythology coming back, but in a modern twist. This is all great, and so that's I think what I wanted to cover for creating a character. I'm gonna go next to like how you prepare for an actual shoot or to the play, and I appreciate it. This is really awesome. Everything good?
Good, man. Let me get some water real
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, dude. Jacob, anything that I missed or should include? I know want to just, I think I'm pretty much getting through things. You're muted.
There we go. Yeah, I'll certainly talk. I expect we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I'm curious now as we go forward about the reciprocity, especially between actor and director. So as all of this happens, and as the actor reads through and begins to internalize and develop a character, I'm curious about at what point that needs to be kind of externalized and communicated with the director, and kind of how that dynamic begins to unfold as a duality versus how much just happens. The actor makes decisions and the director then cultivates and kind of curates what's going to be focused on day of.
Right, that's good, because next I'm going to go into process. This is great. And okay, so there's a Q. Let me see. I see there's a Q&A. What makes you right for a role? Oh, that's good. Thanks, Max.
You're in the frame, but you're a little bit off. So maybe if you can,
Okay.
a little bit closer to the mic, and then yeah.
Yeah. So
What's that?
here, I'll move over a little bit like that. Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, perfect. All right, you guys, we'll jump back in. Thanks. Okay, so now we're going to talk about preparation for the shoot or preparation before a performance, right? So once you've now developed a character, let me just actually prepare. We talked about the elephant man, so I'm going to jump to. Okay, so now it's about like you've made some choices about preparing. You've taken a part. You're making some choices about preparing for a part. We talked a little bit about this before. I want to just dig in. Sometimes you're required to learn skills beyond the craft of the acting itself, right? We talked about horse riding. We talked about playing guitar for, Almost Famous. Just any thought about that in terms of how you take something like that you're learning and you have to incorporate it, right? I mean, it's the way Prefontaine might have physically ran,
Yeah. There's obviously several ways you can go about it. They're predicated on time and your own agency. So do you have somebody who can teach you something? Do you have the capability to learn it? And do you have the time to do it? All of that has to be in service of the story and what's going to be effective for the audience. So if you've got all the time in the world or let's say you have 6 months to prepare for a play in which your character lackadaisically uses a lasso to rope shit in his hotel room because he's bored. You could think about it two ways. One, how many times is he going to actually do that? How do I prepare myself for 2 times of doing it? 2, let me spend as much time as I can on learning how to use a rope so that the director and I can choose where we want to use it or not use it. So the question of time becomes a very important one. Every single actor should have the capacity to fake a lot, because that's really what we do all the time, is just fake shit, right? So the question, for instance, with guitar, we spent 5 or 6 weeks really on 2 components. One, me holding the guitar and walking around And still there were times I see the movie, I'm like, I don't know if the sound of somebody holds a guitar, Billy. But I mean, it was a good try for a theater guy. And the two was what it's like for the audience to be taken away by somebody doing something really wicked on the music scene, like a fucking crazy riff that really drives the audience out of their mind. Why is it that some performing artists are so infectious, like with their dexterity? I mean, watch Kendrick Lamar, just the dexterity with which he can manage language is fascinating. Not to mention what he's actually saying, which is fascinating. Not to mention how he's performing, which is fascinating. But just the dexterity alone would be enough to drive interest. And so one of the things that they wanted with Russell is, you know, early on in the movie, the writer had written, your guitar playing is incendiary. Well, that's got to imply that it lights some shit on fire, right? Like that, you watch that riff and you think, you know, like you sing. And so it was in Cameron's best interest and in my best interest if we could find a moment that I could fake a version of that. And so I really spent several months and not very pleasant to be around. There was something we had to record for the 20th anniversary of it. And I can remember they wanted me to review it before they, you know, sent it in. And several of the people were like, yes, Billy was very serious. Which was not very difficult code for, he was a pain in the ass to be around on such a fun-loving movie. He was the real downer. Like, I was serious because I didn't play guitar, and it's really hard to learn something like that when you're in your 30s, especially under the pressure of, you know, being somebody who's great at it. But the energy was very focused to one shot where I'm playing a solo and Cameron's going to start on my hands and then he's going to tilt up to me. And that's going to sell to the audience that it is actually me playing the guitar all the time. So all I did was play that solo again and again. And Peter Frampton, you know, you get this is one of the perks of being in movies. Sometimes you get incredible people who are super happy for some reason to help you learn to fake to do something well enough. And Peter, apart from being just a world-class human being, was so game at this. But he moved at the speed of light. Like he wasn't somebody who had taught a novice guitar in probably his entire life. He had just been a guitar god. Right. And so he's like, well, you know, I can show you how to play it. You play it like this. I mean, that's how you play it. And that's how you fucking light up a crowd of 50,000. In any case, you're welcome. But meanwhile, that doesn't mean anything to me. That's what you don't want to see, is me being, you know, that Spinal Tap. So, and I think actually all those guys actually did play. But we worked literally on the fingering. Dun, 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 dun. I did that for 4 months, you know, just so we could have that one shot. Right. So the process differs
so you're not trying to really, in that case, it's like you're not trying to really learn how to play guitar.
Oh, good God, no. If you heard what actually came out of my guitar when I did that, well, it would take you out of the movie and it would be unpleasant.
Oh, it's interesting. So, right. So you're getting to a point where you know that there's certain things that you have to do, and it's like working with the director to say, this is how
you're just in the business. It's like, you know, you go to a fashion show, a runway show or something, and somebody comes out and they're all, you know, decked out, looking perfect or whatever. As soon as they close that curtain, the pins in their dress that are holding it up are all like pop, 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 you know, and the thing falls down. It's all smoke and mirrors. But, you know, in Without Limits, the guy was a middle distance runner, right? So I wanted to be able to run my best 3 Mile, you know, and Patricia Donnelly, who was my main trainer and advisor on that, she was not only a world-class hurdlist, but she had worked on a film, and she goes, you're not running distance, okay? The way that we shoot a movie is all intervals. So I'm not going to let you I'm not going to let you run a quarter of a mile.
Oh, wow.
Okay, we're doing 200s. That's it, because that's the length of the track. And occasionally, you know, I'd go out for a run just to kind of test myself on it. But she was like, do not fucking do that, because if you hurt yourself, then we're screwed.
Right.
So part of this is about maintenance. Of you being able to do 400 yards, so we can do like one shot, like right around the corner there. We want to be, and you have to do it at 4-minute mile pace, because that's what these guys run.
Which is a sprint.
Which is, for all of us, a sprint.
Yeah.
And I'm running with guys who are actually runners. But I was in a distinct advantage because we had been doing interval training. I knew what the cool downs would be like. So, you know, as you know, like from a technical point of view, if you're doing a race and it's an entire oval like that, and you want to cover it in 3 different shots, you'll shoot this way. You'll see them coming around the corner this way, right? So you'll see just a part of it there. You go out of shot there, then you change the setup. Then you move the cameras over here so they can get the back of you going around this way, right? Well, during that, this is what the runners didn't understand. During that setup change, which we know all the time, it's usually 45 minutes,
So
right?
you've got time to cool down. And
yes.
And those guys are hurt.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Because then they got to get back up to 4-minute mile speed. Meanwhile, I'm jogging over on the corner, just like kind of staying warm, you know, like slowly keeping pace, like not having, you know.
Funny.
It's a long day. It's 10 hours of that, you know.
So it's interesting because it's funny because I guess I never thought of you're learning.
Wait
these
1
things,
second.
but you're not really completely learning them.
Hey, Kevin and I are doing a live podcast right now.
What's up, Will?
Can I give you a call back in a second?
Me and Eli just won an award at a film festival.
What?
Yeah. Good job, buddy.
What?
New York Alliance Film Festival. We were selected and we won an award.
All right, so I guess you need to have him on your podcast.
You're up next.
We've been talking about you, man.
Next, buddy.
All right, I love you, Dad.
I love you, boy. That's amazing. I can't wait. All right, I'll see.
Supporting actor. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, was it for the movie you guys did together?
Yeah.
Hey, the fathers?
Yeah, the fathers.
Hey.
Live right now?
Yeah. Well, it's being recorded. See?
All right,
Attaboy. Hey, I'm
Good
so
stuff,
proud.
buddy.
bye. Casey.
Yeah, we'll see
We'll
you
see you,
tonight.
buddy. Can't wait.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Holy crap.
That's awesome. Go Will.
That's unbelievable.
Okay, so I want to talk about rehearsal a little bit. Obviously, I know you like to rehearse. Not all, different people have different approaches to that.
Yeah.
But, and obviously in theater, it's a very different animal than it is in film. I'm just curious about how you approach it and what do you try to accomplish for that process?
That's a great question. All of my responses are sort of all I can help think right now is the ways in which I feel like our systems of relating and governance could aspire to being more like a theatrical rehearsal, which is pluralism, egalitarianism, listening, finding common ground, all of those things from people who are coming from vastly disparate lives and histories, and
they've got their own approaches to how they're trying to
they have their own agendas. It might be a personal agenda at the moment. It might be a professional agenda that maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not aware of. Your egos are at play. You're going to be judged in real time. You sublimate all of that, so you can find some kind of common human ground to figure out how to tell a story. That
it goes back to the beginning of what you said, which is why are we all here?
Why are we gathered together?
To
Yeah.
do
So
this
that's what
thing,
I
and so
find
you
in
get
rehearsal.
to try to make sure people are on the same page, and you're doing a drama and somebody else is doing a comedy, it's going to be a problem.
Well, and what's also interesting about me having that point of view about my rehearsal is that there will be people in that rehearsal room who think I'm an asshole for having that point of view about rehearsal, because the rehearsal is really about just getting the lines right. Stop being so fanciful about this big idea, whatever. We just want to figure out where to stand to look cool,
Blocking,
you know, blocking and making sure you don't upstage me too much. Okay, that's really what rehearsal is about. So that's what's great, is I have to accommodate that point of view. They have to accommodate my point of view. It's not as though like
and what do you hope with the director and all this too, right?
Is that precisely is the director is going to be the one, you know, fingers crossed, that aligns the group behind a shared endeavor. There are few as good as Jack O'Brien at giving you a purpose as a collective, and to do it in a way that leaves you feeling like you could go into theatrical battle every night, win, lose, or draw. Like that, because, you know, regardless of how much you rehearse or how great your production is, you're going to have terrible nights. And the company has to be able to survive that together, you know. And so if you've got a director who understands how to articulate that and sublimate your ego a little bit, my personal agenda about what a rehearsal is like, and another person's personal agenda about it are irrelevant. His becomes the, or hers becomes the mandate.
He's got to direct, he or she has to tell you what it is that they want.
You know, Casey, I mean, the truth is I feel lucky enough, and it's a utter privilege to be able to say most rehearsals, I feel like I go in looking to discover what it is we're going to do.
Okay, so theater is one thing, right? Because it's an obvious, natural, has to be a part of that process, right?
Right.
Even at the most basic element, because you have to figure out blocking, whatever.
Correct.
You know, film is sometimes different. Sometimes you don't have the blessing to get to all the rehearsal that you might want. How do you deal with those kinds of circumstances where you
usually end up rehearsing alone and then trying to navigate it on the day?
And you're in on the shoot and on the day of, and you're having conversations with the director, and you're trying to figure out in a compressed way. But
yeah, and you know, sometimes you do that gracefully, and sometimes you do that inelegantly, and
the more, based on everything we're saying, the more it's really about communication, and the more communication you're given an opportunity.
No question.
Can it go too far? I mean, can you have too much rehearsral? And I know sometimes people I mean, you want to leave something in for the spontaneity of it, or, you know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think it comes in the rehearsal. I think it actually comes in the performing of it. I mean, I've had performances of mine in long runs of things. They just become overcooked because you know the line that people are going to fall out of their chairs on. And you've had a particularly bad day and you could really use that laugh. And so you like are focused on that for like 20 minutes more than you should be, which is not, you shouldn't be focused on it at all. And then when it comes, you sing it out to the world and it's like crickets, because you've lost every aspect of the thing that made it funny before because you were waiting for that laugh. It's called result-oriented performing, you know? And that just happens.
And then over time. It's not authentic. It becomes not authentic.
Correct. It becomes ego-driven. Yeah. Right. But I don't see that happening in film. The only thing
cuts around you. Right.
Well, there's just not enough time. I mean, you know, and you haven't had the response yet from anybody to have it overcooked. Right. Listen, you can do something long enough to where you no longer have some of the emotional force behind it because you're depleted, or you no longer have the physical agency because your voice got tired, or you can't run anymore. You know,
Right.
of course that happens. We all have physical limitations, but no, to the point of like people's concern about ruining a moment of immediacy because they are going to quote unquote do it for the first time. I don't see many, I haven't seen many indications of like long careers that have sustained that way of thinking. There are many people I've worked with who don't like rehearsing. That's because they don't like rehearsing with other actors. They've rehearsed it a million times.
So
they love rehearsal. Like they have thought about, that's what rehearsal is, right? That's all you do is just going over.
They want to do it for them. They know what their agency is and what they're trying to
correct. You know what they're not is somebody who's like, just give me the pages on the day. All right, I'll go. You know, they pretend that that's the way that it is because they don't want to interfere with the immediacy of it and like that. And by the way, back to our point before, fine, fair enough, man. If that's the way you're making a living going through it, fair enough. Right. But it does lead to conflict sometimes, where I'm like, okay, so I know you want to cry at this moment, and the director wants us to end up on the floor. But has anybody considered the fact that my character really wants to caretake right now and would hold her up like that? No, because we haven't had the conversation yet.
Right.
You know, and how would either of you be fully in charge of my character's motivations? Because you both have your own motivations. The director is looking for an interesting frame, making sure that the scene works between two people. But it's up to those two people to articulate their needs to the director.
So when we talk about directing, I talk about this. It's, you know, from a director standpoint, it's hard because you're dealing with both directing of the actors and directing of camera, right? So and people will navigate often to one or the other more than both. Rare to find
absolutely
both. And so,
well, I would put it this way, you know, sort of when we were talking about before in terms of having different schools of acting training. You only have we all only have a certain bandwidth. Uncovering the language of acting, I'm only uncovering the language of my acting, right? I couldn't direct actors any more than I could, you know, fly a plane. I mean, I might try to see if they're like my style of a person that I could communicate with, but I've got no experience that I could get the result out of them that I get out of myself in certain moments, right? So even as somebody who knows how to talk about acting, I'm not sure I have a way of directing actors. That's a whole discipline of learning. Not to mention the camera and how camera, that's an entirely different language. People still ask about like the line. So you're going to be on this side and then on this side. But now if we want to move over there for the second part of the blocking, how's the line going to be over there? That's at the point at which I go, you know, like
leave that to the DP.
Of course. I mean, so to your question of somebody being able to describe me, you know who was amazing at it? He wasn't even a director on the thing that we were working together, but Mark Duplass. He understands the system of production in a way that is so sophisticated, and like he's like he understands all of the various disciplines required to create the whole. And I'm talking about from like how to print paper to how to sell it to a studio.
Mark's
incredible mind, and also as an actor's mind as well. And so to watch him, you know, it was thrilling, obviously, in a way that it could be understood, but it was also shameful because it was clear that of my own limitations are very focused on my one discipline.
Was there a way that he approached rehearsal? I mean, I say that because I was going to ask, are there rehearsal techniques or other directors?
Very practically, like, because
knowing like, I need this, you need that. He would have the conversation with you about, we're both going to end up on the floor.
Not only that, but he understands the machine around him is saying, you guys only have an hour and a half, and this is a 3-page scene. So
how are you going to tackle this?
How are you going to tackle this? So that should be a part of the rehearsal.
Because how are you going to block it? Can you cut out a camera angle?
Correct.
Right.
So that's not how I was thinking of rehearsal.
Well, that comes also, he's both a very, he's a filmmaker, he's a director, he's a producer, right? So it brings a
precisely
whole element.
But it's a rare commodity. I mean,
that's interesting. Yeah.
Bart is phenomenal. Bart Freundlich is phenomenal at talking about acting and understanding the camera. And so the experience is a really enjoyable one working together. But I've worked with, Cameron, fascinating example of this. He was fascinated with acting and fascinated with nuance, and also was so smart that he understood that there was not one kind of actor, that you had pompous ass me playing the guitar guy and like, I'm going to go about it this way,
right.
And you had Kate, who was like just available, free, and let me find, and we had to do scenes together in which he had to tolerate me talking as much as I've talked in this podcast, and Kate being like, Billy, can we please just shoot this? And he did both, and it was mostly out of curiosity and ingenuity.
Knows how to deal with personality.
That's another special skill. But I've worked with some great.
I have one thing, it's funny. So in looking through my notes, I write this in the fall of 2001, right after 9/11, we got to work together on the 24-hour plays.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember so vividly about that day, amongst other things, is that you had the 24-hour play is a process where a play is written overnight, actors come in the next day, they basically have a day to learn the material and perform it in front of an audience that night. And the first time that we did this was right after 9/11. Billy had 6 pages of monologue basically to memorize. And I remember myself as a friend and as a producer of the show thinking, I have just screwed my friend. Like that he's going to have to do
Dude,
this.
I had to sing and dance too, as I remember.
Dance and the whole thing. Of course, you performed it fantastically. And I always think back, like, how the hell do you remember lines like that? Like, is there...
That's funny.
Is there and times when somebody comes into you and on the day of they're giving you change lines and you have to
accommodate.
Is there, just for students, is there anything, are there tricks or just anything that you could
So I would suspect, I mean, in the same way that there are people who intuitively understand engineering or intuitively understand the mechanics of a car engine, because that's the way their brain works, like visually, spatially, they can see how things work practically. I would say by and large, and again, this is a theory, could be terribly wrong, you don't find actors early in their career who don't know how to memorize. It's too intimidating. So everybody who is an actor has the kind of brain that understands how to internalize dialogue. I don't know why. It's like a mathematical mind.
That's
like
interesting.
When I was a junior in high school, we were studying Hamlet, and our teacher wanted us to memorize the first maybe 10 lines of it. And without even trying, I had the whole thing down. And
wow, that's interesting.
Back to my acting style, my choice was to do a Mel Brooks version of it. Like I was just a class clown. But the noteworthy part of it, again, was that I could internalize this text verbatim without really trying. So I would suspect most actors, they already have that brain. Otherwise they wouldn't be in this. In fact, when you find people who are like, I could never do that, I just can't memorize the lines. You know, they say it like it's a defect. It's just the way their brain works, like a mathematical brain. And that's what I think. Because I've seen also my brain recede in its capacity to do that over time. And I've had to develop a relationship with, different mnemonics to try to memorize. But the most important one for sure is text analysis, because you don't say anything. Character doesn't say anything unless they need to say something. So if you understand the need, you will find what you're going to say. Yes, if it's written well. So avoid stuff that's not written well.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the day of performance, right? So whether you're in theater or film, is there a routine that you go through, to prepare for approaching the day of performance?
Oh yeah, definitely. And
everything. Like you're an athlete and you're eating, Michael Jordan, I think he ate like a steak every day for lunch.
Yeah, there is no question. Let's see, what was the last thing that? When we did Waiting for Godot and No Man's Land. So Waiting for Godot, it was about a 45-minute prep. If the curtain was I think we had like a 7:30 curtain. I mean, we had like earlier shows, I think, or maybe 7. If it was 7, you're required to be at the theater. They call it half hour, right? So you're required to be there under Actors Equity rules at 6:30. So that the stage manager is like, good, everybody's here, we can start the show.
Right.
So you're required to be there at half hour. But I would get there typically an hour or 45 minutes before. I would stop by Hale and Hearty and get a bowl of soup, depending on which ones they had. My favorites, I think there was like a chicken tortilla, something or other, but there was a Hale and Hearty right next to the theater. I would, because it gives you a little bit of nourishment, but it doesn't weigh you down, so you have usually you get keyed up doing a play. So even if it comes down at 11, you're up till 2 or 3. Just the experience is often energizing.
Yeah, of course.
Or like terrible and terrifying, and like you can't stop your mind from racing. All those things. It's an unusual experience. So if you get a full night's sleep and you go to bed at 3, you're probably going to get up at 9. And then be kind of weary for the first part of the day. Maybe try and exercise or read something light, not too taxing. And then I would probably have the same kind of lunch, some sort of sandwich or a salad and sandwich or something, and then have that soup right before. And then I had about a 20 to 30 minute physical warm up and vocal warm up. And that was all of my regimen for that particular warm up was based upon the work that I was doing on stage for Waiting for Godot.
Right.
So I had he had a very high placed voice in that. So the placement was up in the head, which requires, you're going to blow your voice out if you start doing
right off the top
energetically without sort of expanding the range of which your voice can operate from a chest voice to a high head voice. And that's just like very slow kind of hey, 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 that kind of shit, right? You know, that's just a slow
But it's like an
way.
athlete warming yourself
It's just
up.
getting so you don't fuck anything up, right? And then the more extensive a performance you're doing, the more you have to warm up. So on that one, I kind of balanced on one foot for a lot of it. So I had to do stretches so that I could be properly aligned when I came off stage, which was the same with Elephant Man. Because I was so disorganized on stage, I had to do stretches and strengthening exercises to make sure that I was, you know, neutrally organized by the end of it and not limping by the end of the run. So, you know, for Elephant Man, that was an hour warm up for sure.
Right.
And that, again, both physical and vocal. And I mean, it's boring to go through the exercises, but all of those exercises I learned in graduate school, or in the first couple of years I was acting professionally, from people who had been in graduate schools and gave me other exercises. Right. Very few of them are things that I invented myself, you know. So yeah, like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's I've talked about this before so much, it feels almost like an athlete. You know, you get in routine and you go through it. Theater, I mean, feels it gives you a better opportunity for the consistency of it. Film different, right? So because you could be shooting mornings one day and afternoons the next and nights the next, right? So how do you?
It's very rare that I do any preparation on set for a film or television.
So different.
I do it at home on the weekends, whatever. But when I come into work, because there's such long days, you know, it's a very,
you don't know entirely when you're going to shoot.
You don't know when you're going to shoot. So if you come in primed and ready and then have to sit for 4 hours, you're going to be bringing a level of frustration and anger that is probably not the characters. And whatever it is that you were sitting on is probably not going to be quite there. Whereas if you're doing a play, you know, like the whistle blows at 7:30, like, and you've got 2 hours and then you're done.
So then you're in your trailer and they're calling you to, you know, they give you, hey, you're going to be on set in 10 minutes. I mean, is it like a compressed version, or do you know your lines, you've made the decisions for all the things that we talked about before, and you've got to step on set and be mentally ready?
I mean, I guess there are some characters, some situations where I've needed like further provocation, something to help me with a particularly cathartic moment, and that could be any number of tools you can use. There's a thing called sense memory, where you try to use one of your senses to provoke a certain feeling that may or may not be your own, you know, but often, like for instance, if it is your own and you have a song that you used to listen to when, you know, your best friend punched you in the face when you were in junior in high school or whatever, and you listened to this song on the way home feeling angry and disappointed and concerned, and you wanted that to be right on your fingertips before this so you could project that onto the person you're playing against. You kind of play that song in your headphone before, and it takes you back to that moment, just, you know, like a little bit, just enough to kind of
to get
flip that switch. And then the emotional vulnerability, and again, whether or not it works or is authentic, sometimes it's a process that works, sometimes it's not a process that works. But for me, I typically, it's about the story, and as long as I understand the story and I understand the character,
get into it.
I'm not really worried. And again, yeah, sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not. That's just, you just have to live with that. There's not much that I know that I can do that's like,
and you hope you're working with a director that can feel and give you some work with you. You know, you're on set, calls action, you deliver a performance.
Yeah. I mean, there was, I remember I was working with Bill Macy on a movie called Rudderless, and there was a moment at which my character is meant in the script to have a complete breakdown, emotional breakdown, you know, where it dictates sobbing or whatever. And I typically am not so excited about like result-oriented direction like that, because it puts a kind of pressure on you that can make you self-conscious and subvert the possibility of you being vulnerable enough to actually accommodate that.
Yeah.
So in any case, I knew that this is what the story needed in the moment. And I had to fly to Paris to a film festival there. Or was it was Cannes, actually. Blood Ties was there. And I remember telling our director, who I loved, I was like, I can't do this, man. I'm in Oklahoma right now, and it's a 5.5 week shoot, low budget movie, and I'm in every scene. Like, he's like, well, we'll buy 2 days of your movie. And I was like, I'm not even sure what that means, man. And then like the producer of our movie calls me and goes, so it looks like we got 2 days off. You're going to Paris. And I was like, fuck me, man. So I go to Paris. I mean, not Paris, so I can. And we do our thing. And like I say, I love Guillermo, and all that was fantastic. But it's a long way of saying, when I got back to set, the next day I had this big scene. And the experience of going to Cannes and flying back and forth, I felt depleted. I didn't feel totally on my thing. And in any case, I was prepared, and I had music cues that I was listening to that, and I had this long walk up to this spot where I see a monument that really strikes me. And Bill's trying to do it all in one shot. And so there's a Steadicam guy there, and then there's 2 cameras waiting, while we get there. And so I listen to my music, do the walk up, see the monument, stay available. Nothing's happening. Staring at the monument. Cut, back to one. Just go again, Bill. Take 5. Just give me one more time, Bill. Hey, I totally get it. Your process, I want you to be there too. You're not, so it's time to fake it. Okay?
And that's what Macy said.
Fake it. And so, I mean, I was like this. I was like,
oh my God.
I go.
Why do I feel like that's a scene in a movie in and of itself?
I go. Yeah, okay, go. And that's what you do. You go back to faking it, And then
do the best
alternatively, that brings up something,
Right.
I mean, it is not the iteration of that scene that I feel like was in me,
right.
like I felt, but that was what was in me that day, and that's what you have to live with the rest of your life. That is my, and audiences will interpret that as that's how I wanted to do it, which is not how I wanted to do it, but that's how we got it done.
I mean, so when you talk about a director, different styles, and it's funny because obviously Bill Macy came out of a very specific style of acting with the Atlantic School.
Totally.
Very specific,
Speaking
right?
Of, yeah.
Right. So that's, and
say the words, just say the words.
Right. And so,
developed by David Mamet, who didn't want anybody getting his words wrong.
Right. So it's about doing the words and doing it in a particular style, and not even, so
don't ask the kind of questions that I ask.
Yeah. Exactly. It's probably a gross interpretation, but you're not going that deep in the motivation, right? It's more.
I haven't studied it.
Right.
I've only anecdotally read aspects of it, and who can possibly argue against the efficacy of that thing if it gives you Bill Macy?
Bill Macy, incredible actor, and David Mamet, incredible playwright.
So there are virtues to that, but sometimes I feel like that's a misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of what the actual confluence of events are that led you to that. So you might think, and David Mamet is an incredibly intelligent person and a very capable writer, so he can articulate a theory about this in such a way that it seems indefatigable, like that. Oh, that must be the truth, I guess. And I just feel a little dubious if like the central thesis of that is that playwrights are king, words are king. your job as an actor is to not get in their way with all your bullshit. And there's a virtue to that insofar as the audience hears the words.
Right.
I just feel like there are lots of possibilities with any piece of material.
One approach.
And to deny the potential agency of disparate voices contributing to the story is to deny its overall potential in like the canon of American playwriting. So I don't want to see just one interpretation of Glengarry Glen Ross.
Right, that's interesting, right. Okay, so in that case, is there an approach is there a way that you wish it could have been different? Like what could you have done in that moment that given you the opportunity to maybe it was just what you had in the day and
that's what I had in the day.
And that's what it was.
That's what it was. And actually that's one of learning to be an adult is to not throw a tantrum that you didn't get that you couldn't take advantage of this amazing opportunity to tell this part of the story that is so affecting in as great way as you're capable, and as great a way as you're capable. And this is one of my theories about acting in plays too. And back to your sports analogy, you're never your best day. We always want to think that that's what we really are, is the day we went 4 for 4.
Right.
I had 6 ribbies. I had a home run in the ninth to win the game. It was awesome.
Some days you're going to have that, but most days you won't have it.
And what you really have is an average. So have a professional average over the length of your career, and you'll be a major league player.
It's funny because as we've gone through this, I have questions about, the relationship with the director and things we talked about the director sometimes being oriented to camera, sometimes being oriented toward acting. But I mean, it really sounds like through all the preparation work, you get a sense of what it is you're trying to accomplish. You prepare for the day. You do the best work that you can under the circumstances. Some days you're going to have directors who will approach it in a different way, and maybe actors who are with you, and other days it's going to be different, and you just try to present it the best you can under the circumstances, right? I mean,
that's it, Casey. And
but so
the
much
bigger
preparation. I mean, it's like
that's it. And
the more preparation you can do,
that everything. So like, you see a guy who is called up from the minors. He gets one at bat and he doesn't deliver on it. He doesn't shit his pants, but he grounds out.
Yeah.
That whole event takes about 1.5 minutes. You don't see the entire lifetime he has spent to be able to accommodate a moment like that, both physically and mentally. It is, and he's willing to live and die with that result in that moment.
Right.
So that's what you've got to be prepared for, is to be able to turn the page on that, have somebody write nasty stories about your performance and not being a clutch player and making a choice to be on the wrong team, or, that's not in your control. So if you can prepare as much as you possibly can, be as flexible with your instrument as much as you possibly can, endeavor to do stuff that is worthwhile for you, for your community, for this moment in your career, whatever. Live with the results and then get back on the fucking horse again.
Right.
That's it.
It sounds like over your career, your relationship to all this has really evolved, right? I
Definitely.
mean, like the way that you
it's humbling. Life is humbling. Yeah.
The way you interact with directors. Do you watch takes? I'm just curious.
I do now.
I was going to ask.
If there's a question, I do now for sure.
Do you, when you're doing work, if you're looking at stuff, do you still, I mean, you're interacting with the other actors. I mean, how much do you, I don't want to say push, but it's like, I guess again, are you reading the situation? I mean, how often are you're working with other actors, you have an opportunity to have discussion with them about what you're going to try to accomplish? Is it,
You read the room. You see to what extent people are interested in that conversation,
and what
to
the
extent they're not.
director, and what extent the director is open to what
Yeah.
you're doing?
And yeah, if you've been doing it long enough, you'll see that there's a lot of different ways that you can find a scene. And just because I have an affection for a certain kind of way doesn't mean that it's the right way.
As you look to the future, are there still things that you're doing to try to, you're continuing to evolve? I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's what they taught at NYU. Don't stop asking questions. Like
keep exploring,
keep
trying
exploring
things.
No question about it. And I think that comes in the form of the kinds of opportunities that you get and how you exploit them. And
are there roles that you haven't had a chance to play that you would find interesting?
I never think about
roles
that.
Or just
no, I don't have anything. It's all predicated on the time something is presented to me, and if I have an appetite for it because it struck me in a certain way.
You're not right. And we've talked about this before. You're not really trying to develop material for yourself. It's really. I mean,
with my younger brother Brooks, we have been mostly just because we want to work together. But it's not because I came to him at a certain point when I wasn't working very much, and I said I want to play this kind of character. I think it'd be interesting. And he tried to write something for me, and we just never found the right collaborative, iteration. But no, by and large, I'm
any directors or actors that you haven't worked with yet that you think?
Oh yeah, I mean tons.
I mean, you've been blessed to get to work with some really amazing people.
I've worked with some incredible people, and there's so many more people I want to work with. Yeah.
Well, again, so I guess I'd finish it up with this. And it's so fun that Will actually popped in, because the last question I was going to have was
winning an award.
I know, with winning an award, even better, which is, our audience, like I said, is largely students and recent graduates. And of course, you have a son, Will, who is interested in this field.
Yes.
Not just acting, but filmmaking,
writing and filmmaking. Yeah, for sure.
What are your thoughts for him that might relate to other people, just in terms of how he explores it or how other people explore this?
Well, as a parent, it's a concern, because the lack of consistency can make for a challenging ride at times. And it is notoriously a difficult profession to make a living at. And if you can accommodate those two potential variables in a way that is not overwhelming, that allows you to still express yourself creatively in the way that drew you to this in the first place, how can you not encourage someone to do it?
Right.
On the other hand, if stability, if emotional dysregulation are concerns for you, take up welding, immediately. This is a horrible choice.
It's not a career for the faint of heart.
It is. I remember Dee Corvina said, and this was at Chapel Hill, and I was taking one of the acting classes with her, because she let me take so many of the classes, even though I wasn't a drama major. She said, I'm just going to tell you all this right now. Do not do this if you don't have to. And I remember feeling like so dispirited. I was like, Dee, how can you say that? You should be inspiring people to get to this. And I think she's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And if you have to do it, you better do it. Until the
just
market
gotta
tells you
embrace it.
you can't do it,
Right.
you better do it, because that compulsion is is one that should be cherished. Our desire to be expressive as artists and understand ourselves and the world around us and share it with people, I think is a wonderful, glorious thing. And but if you want to do it because of its proximity to fame, and because our world is telling us fame is the only real currency. Actually, I think that was a line from Lester Bangs in Almost Famous.
Yeah.
Then fuck off. All right.
Right.
Like, do not do this, because you'll be wasting your time and everybody else's time.
And melt eventually, but yeah.
It's, you know this more than anybody.
Yeah.
You are a champion of people who try to do this, and you have the wherewithal and the agency and the mind to be able to navigate not just their personalities, but all the variables that go into promoting them. And you know, that I can sit here and talk about myself and acting for 2 hours. I mean, you are able to handle assholes like us, and also be like, hey man, also I paid your electricity bill. So
Yeah. Well, BC, thank you, man.
thank you, KC.
This is awesome.
Enjoyed it.
Very appreciative and super illuminating. I think it's really amazing. So thank you, dude.
Right back at you. All right, pal.
Thank you, guys. That's a wrap on Deep Dive on Acting with Billy Crudup. Thank you, guys. Jacob, thank you, buddy. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.